Hello and welcome to the Australian Institute of Insider Threat. This is the second week of GITM, which is the Global Insider Threat Awareness Month. Hi, my name is Boss Fisher and I'm the founder of the Australian Institute of Insider Threat. And today we have a special guest from AFCA, which stands for Australian Fraud and Anti-Corruption Academy. And we have Michael Callan. Welcome.
Hi, Bose. Nice to be here with you. Don't do this too often, so I'm pretty excited about it.
Good. Thank you for joining us. So today we're going to discuss the sort of the integrity between insider threat awareness and fraud, ethics, and integrity, and see how together we can strengthen the resilience of organization and also sort of foster a culture of ethical behavior. But before we sort of dive in, I want for you, Michael, to give a bit of a background of, where you come from, your role within the organization, and so forth, and let the viewers understand who you are.
Oh, thanks, Bose. I really do appreciate the time and effort and the ability to have a chat with you here this morning. I'm as you said, Michael Callan. I've got a sort of an eclectic mix of things I've done over the years, but I fell happily into ethics, fraud awareness, and integrity activities quite late in my career. I started off as a military officer, did 20 years in the regular army, and did a wide variety of both operational and staff work, paperwork. I left as the head of Army's workforce planning just before Timor. I then joined the public service and worked in a range of both personnel procurement, which is an interesting space to work in the public service, and social security portfolios. And I found the social security one was the most difficult, not because it's hard work, it's just that the range of people you meet there are quite,
Yep, yep, yep.
they have some significant problems and challenges, and it's quite debilitating in some respects to work in that environment. That led me back into the Department of Defence as a public servant, working in the family support area. And I would consider that to be one of the best jobs I've ever had. But after 5 years there, it was a little bit too much for me. And I was asked to take over as the Inspector General of the Australian Department of Defence, which is a fraud and corruption role. Now, I'd been studying it for a while and I had an interest in that area, and I had done a range of investigative roles in my time.
Yep.
And I spent about another 5 years there as the Inspector General, completed a Masters of Anti-Corruption in Vienna, and then decided at the ripe old age of 58, I would leave the department and run my own training organisation, which we've
That's
done.
fantastic.
So the
Fantastic.
Australian Fraud and Anti-Corruption Academy was set up in around about 2018, specifically to do digital forensics, but we expanded out into anti-corruption, fraud control, government investigations, and we've also done, funnily enough, countering violent extremism, because of the
Oh,
eclectic
wow.
range of skills we've got. And recently started open source. And a lot of the stuff that we train in the academy is focused on the integrity side of the house.
Yep.
And we're finding that it is all of it's quite integrated. And as we'll probably discuss this morning, there's not an element that we don't train in that can't be used in some other area. But it all, to me, in terms of the insider threat, it all comes down to insider threats.
Yeah, look, very
When you think
interesting.
of it,
Yes, yes. So, from your definition or from your point of view, how would you define the sort of fraud awareness, given that we're going through a month of insider threat awareness? How do you see it?
I think fraud awareness is what we call the sheep dip approach in most organisations. So
There you go.
uh, uh, it boils down to this good versus bad argument. And what it fundamentally misses out, the fraud is a human activity.
Yes,
Fraud doesn't happen because the systems break. Fraud happens because people break the system.
very
And so
good
the
point.
insider threat in fraud awareness is not well known. People don't realise that the insider threat on the insider that's got access to information or to funding or capability to move funding is your biggest risk in a fraud sense.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
the external threat in a fraud sense is quite minor. I think in my experience, I've never seen an external threat to any agency create a massive loss. It's always the insider that causes the biggest loss. And in particular, when they're corrupt or they're using their insider knowledge to rip the system off.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to explain that to people who are not in the know.
Yes.
For a lot of people, it's simply um, uh, credit cards the biggest fraud threat.
Interesting.
And I look at them and go, even in the biggest agency, the most I've ever seen lost on credit card is about $80,000. Yet at the same agency, I've seen $45 million being lost because of an insider threat. So this is this lack of understanding for agencies around what fraud is and what the insider threat, their role they play in major fraud, really.
Yeah. Interesting you say that. So, what role do you think that insider threat awareness could play in strengthening, organizations' fraud prevention measures?
I think if we understood that it's a human factor, so when I've always thought fraud control to people, I've taught there are four types of people on the planet. There's the absolute the absolutely honest person who will follow the rules no matter what.
Yep.
Then there's which is a rare individual in any organization. Then there's the next individual who is the B type personality who, look, might bend the rules occasionally, might not refund a travel allowance, might have accidentally used the credit card the wrong way, might have taken a few pens and pencil from the workplace for their kids' school year, um, but generally will follow the rules and are ethical. That's then followed by the C-type personality, which is essentially the person that, if an opportunity arises, um, will take the opportunity and steal.
Yeah. 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 Yep. Yep.
Right. There's a thought that comes from stuff out of the 50s. We've known about this since management theory started hitting its ropes in the 50s. When we get to I've added an extra person to this, the real insider threat, and they're the predators. They're the D type. I call them a D type personality. They use their C type people to rip the organization off. They set the conditions to actually break the systems. They set the conditions upon which they can conduct fraudulent activity, whether it be steal money, steal equipment, or
Yes.
steal information. And they can be there for a very long time. And they do essentially, and I hate to say this, they use the same techniques that a pedophile uses.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so they will groom not only the victims, but they'll also groom the agency that they're in to believe A, they're a good person,
Yes.
B, that they're
Okay.
doing the right thing for the right reason, and also and they should be either breaking down and simplifying or building up and making more complicated systems to
Yes.
hide within.
Yep. 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 Yep.
So this is where people don't understand. A lot of the big fraud's not actually done by someone with a credit card or access to petty cash, or it's done by people who spend their time grooming grooming others within the organization, grooming the organization itself, and setting up the conditions for their success and the
Yes.
organization's failure. And if people can't need to understand that, if I was putting in fraud awareness, and I've always have, is you have to understand the type of person that you're dealing with. Now, what does that mean in terms of prevention? You would be looking very carefully at where your highest risks are within an organization and who's got control of that, and monitoring that quite closely.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yep.
especially if you get that person that says, there's nothing wrong in my side of the house, everything, as you can see, everything's perfect and we've never had a trip up, that'd be the first person I'd go and look at.
Oh, okay.
Because, yeah, if you think about it, people make mistakes. They
Yes.
send the money to the
Yeah.
wrong
Yeah.
place.
Yes.
They accidentally use their credit cards. They overspend because it was Thursday and they forgot what they were supposed to do. But the perfect balance, never makes a mistake organization worries me, because that's the one where it's because you can't see in, and normally they don't report. When you
Yes.
don't get reports on time, or the reports are scant, or the reports never say there's a problem,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
that's grooming.
Yeah.
I can trust him. He always delivers. There's no problems with his organization. Well, that'd be the first place I'd go looking for an insider threat.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd be
Yeah.
looking at everything he's done.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important part of building a sense of how people operate and the psychology of it.
Yeah. So you mentioned about prevention just early on. So how would organizations sort of enhance their fraud awareness using sort of programs by insider threat detection and prevention sort of countermeasures?
So, see, the thing with the insider threat part of what we tend to focus on is the things that are low hanging fruit and easiest to
Yeah,
identify.
correct.
That's why if you ever talk to anyone in any government department, they say the biggest threat is credit card. It's not, because credit cards are so easy to pick up. So easy. That's the only reason we focus on it, not because it's the biggest threat, but it's the one that is the easiest to pick up.
Yes.
Because as
Yeah.
soon as you spend above a limit,
Yeah.
or the spending's not right, the pattern's easy to find. AI can you can generate AI scripts that will follow that when it with certain conditions, and pick that up quite easily. Where it's where your focus has to be is on where big ticket items that are hard to see, or very complex environments where it's hard to see where the money's going.
Yep.
So, for instance, especially in the ICT space, um, you know, if I can gain access as a businessman inside, say, ICT, where they're desperate for workers, I can then start setting up my own workers in key critical positions within ICT to continue to funnel contracts into my business.
Correct. Correct.
So one of the biggest ones I've ever seen is where someone's been brought in to be an advisor to a senior executive officer in a department, and he was there on a no cost contract. So the department wasn't paying him there to provide advice. Now that's a target in it. That sort of thing is what you really need to do, and it's hard to pick up.
Yeah.
So you have to have
Yeah.
systems in place that do two things. It says to the contract managers and the contract signers, you need to have done your due diligence, and you need to monitor these people. And there are certain conditions that we won't accept. And if they appear in
Yeah.
the system, they should alert someone. The other one is listen closely to junior staff, because the junior staff can actually see what's happening, but their senior staff are overriding them. That's
Yeah.
normally how
That's
it
really
happens.
interesting. Yeah. Really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the whistleblower programs are really important um, in that regard. I've got someone I can tell, I think this is not right.
Yes.
Um, Simplification of systems. So if you have a very complex approval and a process in which you've got to go through 18 separate legs to get to an outcome, it's hard to monitor that. But if you've got a simple process in which you can tell who's taken a decision at each point, much simpler to
Yeah.
pick up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think they're the sort of things where the basic principle is I should be monitoring the behaviour of people and the flow of paperwork, and I need to have some sort of access to junior staff to have them sort of being the canary in the coal mine.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Other behaviours that you should keep an eye on, especially at the senior management level, for insider threat, is uh, unusual relationships between your decision makers and external contractors. If it's really close, but they're delivering, most agencies go, oh, well, they've got a good working relationship and they're delivering. I'd be looking closely at that and monitoring that behaviour.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And, and the final one is to remind senior executives, because they're the big decision makers in any organisation, whether it be private or public enterprise, that their relationship with contractors is a working relationship. If it becomes closer than that, then they need to consider their position on it, because it is, as you can see now, um, with PwC, the Big Four, Ernst and Young, etc. I think it's a cosy relationship,
Yes.
and because they've had access to government information, and they've come in and had access to government information, they've got ability to influence. So again, that final one is to make sure that when people have access like that to your information,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
there's
Yes.
some sort of control around it.
Correct.
And a good example of that is, and it's uh, a major business, major international business, had a contractor inside a government agency. that contractor had access to, because they needed to. They had access to information on a brand new tender coming out just by accident. And when they did, what they did was they took that information back to their bosses, the major company, and said, "Hey, look, this tender's coming up, and we've got the insider run on it." What the business did was really interesting. Was that they sacked the guy on the spot.
Yes.
They went back to the major agency and said, this we've been given this, we are accusing ourselves from this tender. Even though
Yes.
we've got the best
Yeah.
equipment for it, we're accusing ourselves, and we will not, that guy's been sacked. So the major agency accepted that. They were accused. It was $250 million contract, I think. But that leads that to the thought of, you should be monitoring the contractor
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and their access to info.
Yeah, yeah. So it very much leads to my next question, and you partly already answered, which is the common overlaps between insider threats and fraud, and what should organizations should be aware of.
Um, just ask that question again.
So it's very,
It,
so you mentioned in a lot of things around monitoring. So when I look at from an insider threat, and then I listen to what you mentioned, there's quite a few overlapping between insider threat and fraud. It's not as if that two disparate situations and so forth. Uh, I suppose the question is, how do you see that sort of that overlap between insider threat and fraud?
I think it's almost integral. I think the inside, you've got an insider threat who's purposely there to gain advantage for themselves. Now, fraud here in Australia is defined as something of value,
Yeah,
not as money or equipment. It's something of value. Now, information's of value, personal relationships of value, access is value. Money is value, equipment's value. They're all value. So fraud and insider threat are almost integrated. The insider threat, the insider threat is that depersonality, and therefore, for
correct,
me, that locks quite nicely into
correct.
into fraud. Fraud is one of the outcomes of an insider threat.
Yeah,
Now, if you're talking about sabotage, but that's outside the fraud regime. So insider threat sort of fraud neatly integrates, but then insider threat goes broader because there are things about insider threat that would not be covered by fraud,
yes.
because it's not taking something away from me. It's actually, for my own benefit. It's actually destroying something when you
Yeah,
talk about
yeah,
sabotage.
yeah,
So I think when you think insider threat and fraud, frauds, um, if you really look at that definition that we have, is about value,
yeah,
and it's about deception.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And an insider threat's about value and deception, but
yes,
it's broader than that in terms of what it covers, because it does cover broader things
yeah,
than
yeah.
fraud.
So how does, for example, um, the topic of insider threat awareness, even fraud awareness, sort of support the promotion of ethical behavior within an organization?
I think it comes back to the four personalities. If I recognize this as a human endeavor and not a systems endeavor, it's a human endeavor. Fraud is something that someone deliberately goes to do to deceive you, and take away something of value of yours for their own benefit or somebody else's, a
Yeah,
third party's benefit. Um, so if you look at it from that perspective, strengthening your understanding and knowledge of insider threat
yeah,
leads naturally to understanding what you should do and how ethics plays a major part in the leadership. If you look at ethical leadership, which everyone talks about, but we really don't have a lot of it.
yeah,
Ethical leadership tends to draw other people to them, and the way I explain it to people is, I've got an ethical leader. I will always know that they do the right and ethical thing. So no matter what I do, what problem I've got, if I go to them, I know I'm going to get a consistent answer. So
yes,
therefore, I'll trust my leader. And if you're going to trust your leader, if you can see something going off the rails, you'll go to your leader and say, I think
correct,
that's going off the
correct,
rails.
correct.
And
Yeah,
so I think in the current public service environment, I would not be doing that, because I don't think we've got the same ethical leadership inside the public service that we had,
okay,
say, 20 years ago.
yes,
And that's where it breaks down. So I think if you want to talk about ethics and how it works, you build an ethical culture, you build an ethical leadership. It starts to build trust and consistency. And when you know what the other person should be doing,
Yeah.
then what occurs is that when they're not doing it, you will then end up with an aberration that becomes really obvious and very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So I think from my perspective, I punch that ethics awareness and insider threat awareness together, and you suddenly realize you've got the defense mechanism. Ethical leadership and an ethical culture is the stuff that will really highlight that aberration that comes out of an unethical person.
Yeah. So I suppose the question then is, to follow it up, is if you have some form of insider threat awareness or fraud awareness, how does it help prevent, for example, ethical violations?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. That if you go to I think any government agency, and you get an ethics and fraud awareness training. Um, uh, it's as boring as I hate to say this, batshit. Uh, and when people have attempted to spice it up by using, actors, etc., it doesn't spice it up because it's a boring topic. Because what's in it for me? You talk
Correct.
about it, but it's
Correct.
not walked on the floor. There
Correct.
needs to be more when we talk about ethical training and ethical ethics awareness. Is the what's in it for me approach to it. And strengthening ethical behaviour requires the leadership comes back to leadership.
Yeah.
You know, I worked with a guy here in Canberra about 4 or 5 times, um, and I knew he would never do anything unethical. Never. He was always consistent about how he behaved. I'd work with him tomorrow, and he really had good operating systems, and people worked for him happily. And I don't think we ever had a fraud ever in the organisation
Yeah. Yeah.
ever.
Yeah. 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 Interesting. Interesting. I changed the subject slightly, and I want to touch on the subject of integrity, which is the third arm of what we're talking about today, which is basically, how do insider threats challenge the integrity of an organization?
Yeah, that's if you come back to integrity, meaning the whole is in one piece.
Yes.
Um, if you've got an insider threat, the whole is not one piece,
Correct.
because what you've got is you've got that little crack in the system that then starts to break down. So an insider threat, say insider threat in terms of, say, like outlawed motorcycle gangs, they tend to place people inside major organisations,
They do.
and what then happens is the system breaks down. So when someone is trying to conduct an investigation, an insider can blind the integrity of that investigation, blind them to evidence that might be there, provide suggestions that might send them off in the wrong direction, hide evidence, or when you're trying to conduct a public procurement, say they'll be there just twisting the rules enough
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
break the system.
Yeah.
And so insider threats really damages the integrity of organisation, and at the same time they destroy trust. Because
Mm.
yeah, if you've ever been where something has blown up in the fraud space and people go, who was responsible for that? How did they do it? And who was responsible for oversighting it? And all of a sudden, nobody trusts anybody. And I think that's where an insider can really damage the integrity of an organisation and the trustworthiness of it. Um, you think about the best one I've seen lately, and we've been using this as part of our training in fraud control, um, is the Australian Bureau of Statistics. My God, there's an organisation that has an amazing integrity reputation up until recently, where one of their staff was providing a whole pile of statistics and analysis to an employee of the National Australia Bank.
Yes. That's pretty well
Right?
documented. Yes.
Yeah. So that is the classic insider threat.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And I think they're doing 2 years now. Yeah, they're doing both. Well, no, hang on. The leader of it's doing 4, I think, with a 2-year non-parole period. So
Yeah.
it comes back to that. Their damage to the integrity has been massive,
Correct.
and it's the same with any integrity lapse. The insider can actually do a whole pile of damage, and I always doubt sometimes whether we actually got the insider. We only got the schmuck that got caught. I think there's more people involved in this,
Yeah,
and it's a
interesting.
consistent problem.
Yeah,
Now, that which leads neatly into my view of prevention, detection, deterrence, and response. If you come back to that, my view about deterrence, prevention, and deterrence is actually, and detection is to uh, constantly, as agencies, look straight ahead, look into things that don't seem right, that no one else will touch. So when I
yes,
was at the Department of Defence, we found about $15 million worth, or no, $50 million worth of fraud in the first 6 months I was there, because it was the only time we'd ever looked for it. What we used to do is wait till someone reported it. Now, if you report fraud, you you know,
correct.
it's never going to happen. But if you start looking into systems and seeing where things are going wrong and waste, you tend to find that
Yes,
quicker. So in that respect, I think you have to become a bit of a hunter, which
yes.
comes back neatly back to your conversation around how do you find these things? Well, it's more than monitoring. You've got to start thinking like criminals, essentially.
Very interesting point. So, if we try to maintain a sort of a high level of standards of integrity, this is there a sort of a correlation between high standards and inverse relationship in terms of potential insider threats? I mean, I'm assuming it does help, but there's no guarantee it will stop everything. Correct?
Yeah, it comes back to that ethical leadership. If you maintain, see, so there's no point. There is no point saying we've got zero tolerance for fraud and corruption,
Yes.
and then do nothing about it. So the first time you get a fraud
Yeah.
problem, what you'll do is you'll go, well, I don't really want to send them to jail because that'll be a bit rough. Or the one I had once was, why are we investigating this? It's only a couple of $100,000. Uh, eh, that tends to encourage the bad behaviour.
Yes. Correct.
So when you have an organisation from a top-down view, from the senior leadership down view, is why we're getting involved in this. That's the end. You might as well not be investigating it. So it comes back, the leadership has to step up to the plate and say they did it and they're going to jail, or they did it and they're getting the sack. And there's
Correct.
no conversation being had about that. That's our standard.
Yeah.
So, so setting the standard at the top, there is a correlation between setting the standard and actually living the standard. If you
Yes.
get that right, as I said, I've seen organisations that have set a very high standard, they've lived by that standard. Not only have they prospered as organisations, but they've actually performed very well and had low fraud,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
as opposed to organisations that stand up there and say, we maintain a high standard, zero tolerance approach to it, which always makes me laugh, and then do absolutely nothing about it.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing about it. And I know there's one particular agency here in Canberra that told the Senate that they've got zero fraud, but we know they've got thousands of dollars worth of fraud, and it's
Yes.
not believable. And quite rightly, one of the senators asked them well, maybe you should come out and train all of us in how to do fraud control, because obviously with zero fraud, you're fabulous. I
Yes.
noted the secretary of that department did not take that offer up. So,
Yes.
and I know quite well, fraud is rampant inside that particular department because there's no action. So, from my perspective, setting the standards one thing, got to take the action with it.
So key. Yeah, you got to walk your talk. Yeah.
Yeah,
What role does transparency come into play when we're talking about integrity of organization?
I think, I, I think transparency plays a really big role in building trust and trust in the organisation. Many years ago, I was told we sack someone for the public service, we just put it in the Gazette, we don't ever talk about it again. And I had a boss who, lovely lady, and had sacked a staff member. And she sacked the staff member, and she was completely transparent about it. Not
Yes.
only that, she sent an email out to everybody saying, "This is my decision. This is what," like the 4,000 people in the agency got an email basically saying, "This is what happened. This is who got sacked. And this is why I sacked her." Uh, and um, and I can tell you the behaviour inside that agency changed significantly, and the trust in her grew because people said, "At least I know what she did. I
Yeah.
can
Yeah,
see
yes.
what happened."
Yes. Yes.
And I think that's where it becomes really difficult, where people just they're not on work on Monday and you don't know why. That doesn't set that deterrent. There's no deterrent. And
Yeah.
transparency in both um, dealing with insider threat, transparency in the way you make your decisions, transparency in when you make a mistake.
Yes.
I can remember in that particular case, everyone said, "But if she wins her appeal against you, you look foolish." And she said, "Okay, I'll look foolish."
Yes.
She didn't win her appeal, but the boss basically said, "I'm willing to accept being transparent about my mistakes and my behaviour and my performance,
Yes.
and own it." That comes with that ethical behaviour, then builds trust in the leader, and
Yeah.
as you build trust in the leader, you want to follow that particular person,
Correct.
and therefore
Correct.
people tend to fall in line.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, being transparent, the other part to transparency is if everybody's transparent except you, the insider threat, you're going to get caught really quick too. So this is
Yeah.
why that whole process. Oh, look, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. Uh, you'll talk to some of my supervisors, they go, I've made some spectacular mistakes, but I've always been open about it. I said, I made this mistake. This is what happened. I took my eye off the ball, mea culpa. Um, I've never had a boss go, well, I don't care that you're being honest.
Yes.
I'm going to sack you anyway.
Yeah.
What I
Yeah.
found is they've gone, can you please not do that again? Or I've been punished in some other format. But again, it comes down to being open and honest and transparent builds that trust. It's all about trust inside an organisation. It's not about
Yes.
making yourself look foolish or look good. It's
No.
about,
No. Correct.
you know, I trust this guy.
Yeah. So, sort of two more questions. So, how would organizations then basically integrate insider threat awareness, fraud awareness with sort of broader efforts to promote ethics, integrity, and fraud prevention? What choices do they have right now?
I think I think at the present moment, the current sheep dip is ethical behaviour and what fraud is and what corruption is and how it could possibly happen. Uh, Ethics and fraud awareness is about the fraud triangle. Ethics and fraud awareness is about the red flags of fraud, and they're important things. Don't get me wrong, but the important part about it is I would set that aside and look at the insider threat from the perspective of my four types of people and go, this is the behavior. If you see this behavior in the workplace, it's not ethical. It doesn't build our integrity.
Yes.
It's not transparent. All those conversations. So when you can talk about ethics and you can talk about fraud, but what you really need to talk about is the insider threat
Yeah.
because it's broader than that. So we do ethics. One of our courses is ethics, fraud awareness, and modern slavery. Now that doesn't sound like they connect, but they really connect because fraudulent behaviour generates that modern slavery aspect to organisations, and they are quite connected in that respect. It's the same thing. The insider threat and modern slavery is broader than fraud, and I think if we talk about insider threat, we get a broader view of um, the things that can break down an organisation's capability to operate, the things that can see people leave the organisation, and general trust in the organisation. Because if an organisation's got a reputation for being a bad player, it's
Yes.
going to lose
Yeah.
business.
Correct.
So I think it's really important to turn the table on ethics and fraud awareness and turn the table and go, let's talk about insider threat and how ethics and fraud awareness and corruption awareness and other elements, occupational health and safety, can protect us from um,
Yeah.
that particular threat, and particularly that stuff about ethical leadership.
Yeah. Interesting. Based on our discussion so far, what do you think are the sort of the key takeaways so far?
I think the key takeaway is it comes back to this is a human problem, not a systems problem,
Yep.
and it also gives you a takeaway that for me, ethical leadership is the bit that's going to protect you most from insider threat, because the ethical leader will highlight where there's a dark spot in your organisation. And I've
That's
worked
correct.
with some really good leaders, good ethical leaders, and I've worked with some absolutely horrible, unethical leaders. And the high performing agencies I've worked with have always had a very strong ethical leader, and they tend to not have the insider threats. They're very alert to making sure people behave in a particularly
Yeah.
ethical manner. And I think that's the key takeaway for me at the end is ethical leadership.
Yeah. So we've reached the end of our discussion, but before we sort of say goodbye, I wanted you to touch base on a course that that we're promoting called Ethics and Fraud Awareness Training. Can you go into a little bit details of what it is?
The ethics and fraud awareness training that we're delivering has got some. It obviously got the elements I've talked about today,
Yep.
and we look very, very closely at those four key evidence. So it's got the basics of ethics and fraud awareness that you normally find, but we've added the four players into that particular program, and we're looking at it from the human perspective. And we've got a really good case there, the Causa case, where case study that comes with the training, where you get to actually see how that insider completely brought down a major retailer here in Australia. Absolutely terrible case. But again, the course follow covers off on ethics, ethical leadership, um, fraud awareness, and red flags of fraud. We've also got corruption in there. Corruption sort of is like the sad cousin of fraud,
Yes. Yes.
but it's in there, and we look at those red flags, and then we talk about how to set up procurement systems to actually start to deter some of that fraudulent behaviour, especially when it comes to expenditure and setting up contracts. And then finally, that Causa study, which I found fascinating going through, is there as well. Now, we've got some additional elements there that we can add, which is the modern slavery, and we are going to look at adding the insider threat, I think, now to that particular course for you, because we're starting to see that more and more the problem rather than say an element of the problem.
Cool. So you're going to be able to find that course on the Australian Institute of Insider Threat. So that'll be good. Last but not least, there, Michael, for those viewers that want to reach out to you, what's the best way?
The best way to get hold of me is if you go to our website, www.afca.edu.au, or if you want to personally contact me, it's Michael.Callan, Callan, at afca.edu.au. Either way, I've got some lovely people that you can get through to me on, and if you want to have a chat, we've got a range of courses, and we're always building courses, as you know, Bose. We're constantly on the move.
Yes.
So if you want to get in contact, please use those two lines. And if you're unable to, I'm sure that Bose would probably direct you in the right
Yeah,
direction
look,
as well.
I'll have information on the site, so you know if they don't have it, they can easily find it. Michael, thanks again. I'm so glad that you managed to join us on the part of the Global Insider Trade Awareness Month, and look forward to chatting with you soon.
Yeah, we'll see you next month. Hey, thank you very much, and have a lovely month as well, Bose. Thanks very much. Cheers.
Thanks, Michael. Cheers. Bye.